Hi, everyone. Welcome. We're getting started a minute or so late due to some technical difficulties on my end, but thanks for being here. For everyone joining us live on the Zoom call, please feel free to share in the chat. Let me make sure that you guys can also post and comment for everyone here. Let me make sure. Perfect. That chat box is open. I would love for you to drop where you are joining us from and how many pets you have. Do you have a dog? Do you have a cat? What you're most interested in learning about your pet's nutrition, because this is going to be really, really fun. So if you don't know who I am, welcome. I'm Dr. Katie Woodley, the natural pet doctor, and my amazing guest is Dr. Betsy Redmond, who's from Innovative Pet Lab. And she is just a wealth of information, and we're going to go through how to really reset your pet's nutrition to get you started on like an optimal path in the new year. So I'm going to share this to Facebook. So give me 1 second so that way we can help spread the reach and really dial in and help as many pet parents as possible this new year. And there'll be also some links and some bonus like discounts for you guys too. So stay tuned, grab your pen and paper, and we will get this party started today. Okay, that should be going. Let me just make sure. Good old technology. All right, let me bring up my screen here. Perfect. I love this. All right, so Carol, I'm seeing you in the UK, a dog, Beverly, Tucson, dog, home feeding right now, Lavelle in North Carolina, Tammy in New Hampshire, 4 cats. We're going to be covering both dogs and cats, so don't worry, everyone. We've got you covered. Jamie, good to see you, Virginia Beach and a dog. Michelle, good to see you, Miami. I know Nitro, Snowy, and Dashy Cat. We've got New Orleans, Danielle, I think it's not showing up your whole name. 6 rescue dogs, Isabel, Oregon, Ziggy, a German Shepherd Husky, cats. We've got a combination of cats and dogs here, which is great. And so if you are, once again, if you're just joining us, welcome. I'm Dr. Katie Woodley, the natural pet doctor. I'm a holistic integrative veterinarian who is on a mission to make sure that you, as the amazing pet parent that you are, feel empowered and supported. And so this, of course, is being recorded, and we will send the recording to everyone who registered here. It's also on our Facebook channel, and it'll be reposted on our YouTube channel, Dr. Katie Woodley, the natural pet doctor. But today, if you've been here before, you know this is not the first time that I've been blessed to be in the presence of Dr. Betsy Redmond from Innovative Pet Lab. So I want to get started and dive right in because I know we're running a few minutes late. And I think it's important for people to kind of hear a little bit of your background, Dr. Redmond, of like kind of like where you came from on the human health side, because I truly resonated with this. And I have a feeling there's a few pet parents here that might have come from the human side and realize that we can apply kind of more of this holistic or at least functional medicine approach to their pet's care.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. I was impressed. Somebody has 6 pets that they rescued. It's always impressive. I worked in integrative and functional medicine for years. When I first got in for humans, when I first got there, I was like, well, this can't all be true. I haven't heard about all this. And I got a doctorate at a research institution, but then I started researching it and I'm like, this stuff is true. It works. And so, I'm really familiar with lab stuff. And I had my own dog, Linda, who's 17. If you've heard me speak, I have Linda. And so she had some problems and I wanted to test her. And I thought, well, I talked to clinicians about the test for their own patients' health. And a lot of this research comes from animals. Like, usually they start with mice and rats and move up. And so I knew there was research in it. And some of it's really good. Like, some of it's the vet school. It's solid evidence there. And so I, wanted to start testing Linda. And so I, you don't have a reference range. You can't just do it. Like I could do her in the human world, but then it's like, is that good or bad for a dog? I don't know. Same with cats. Like we started with dogs and then we got cats and we had to find out what's normal for an average pet. And so then we, started Innovative Pet Labs. They're just, pet lovers and people with lab experience.
I love it. I mean, here's the thing, and and we're going to dive into nutrition, so don't worry, everyone, and drop your questions in the chat box. That chat box is open. I'm also, for if you're on Facebook, drop them in the comment section, because this is going to be based around some of the things, maybe challenges or struggles that you currently have with your pets and their nutrition. But one of the things I think is really important here, and I find a big time struggle for a lot of pet parents, is that we just assume all pets have leaky gut, or we assume that there's like a yeast problem when we're dealing with like allergies or itchiness or, inflammatory bowel disease, or they're super sensitive. And like Dr. Redmond just said, we haven't had the testing available to truly identify. So we've always been kind of guessing, like, this is what's going on. And then because we're kind of guessing and assuming that this is occurring, then we start grabbing all these supplements and we're buying like all these things, and we're just essentially potentially throwing money out the window. And so that's what's been so amazing, as being able to, from my science side, I love like being able to actually see, like, is calprotectin high? Do we have inflammation in that gut lining? What's going on with that immunoglobulin A and that mucus lining of the immune system in the gut? And then from that, we can actually get an idea on, now we can use these supplements and we know why we're using them, and we can monitor it. So we can repeat these tests and actually see, is the supplement that we're spending money on actually working, or is it something that's not working? So you don't just stay on that vicious treadmill of hoping and wishing and kind of guessing that something's working. So these tests are really, really great. And I see a question, and it's probably going to come up too, with animal biome and looking at the microbiome. This doesn't look specifically at the strains of bacteria and that microbiome and the diversity, but it's such an amazing complement to that test. So for my patients and clients, I always recommend doing the two together to get a fuller picture of what's going on at the gut level, and also at the digestion, the absorption, the immune system. So Innovative Pet Labs, the tests that they're offering, they're both stool tests, but they're testing a lot of different things that complement one another to truly understand where those imbalances are. So I always want to clarify that, because those tests always come up. They're not the same, but they're amazing at helping us to identify how well our pets are doing internally, rather than once again guessing. So in terms of like kind of starting things, I'm seeing some questions pop up, which is great. One of the things I think that a lot of pet parents get stuck with when they start down this nutrition side, whether it's for their dogs or their cats, they're like, okay, I know I've started doing the research, I've started listening and educating myself. And how do I know that the diet isn't helping my pet, right? Like, okay, maybe we're feeding kibble. And so this is beginner part for a lot of pet parents. So maybe you might be further along the spectrum, but this is very important, because this is kind of the beginner stage where a lot of people are, especially going into the new year. So Dr. Redmond, I know you have some tests too that can actually help identify, like, is this pet actually reacting poorly to the food? Now, this isn't a food sensitivity test, but I want you to talk about one of the tests that you have that can actually help open our eyes up to how well the pet is doing to certain foods. And then we can kind of talk about some of the transition sides if we're worried about that.
Yeah, we look at leaky gut or intestinal permeability. And so we look at two markers there. We're going to look at zonulin and antigliadin, IgA. So that's your immunoglobulin A reaction, making antibodies to gluten. So we're looking at those two and can kind of give you an idea of what's happening, because if you have leaky gut or intestinal permeability, what it's officially called, then you're going to be much more likely to have food reactions. When in the people side, when we used to look at food reactions, we looked at IgG, food reactions, and IgE. If somebody had a lot of reactions, they were more likely to have an increased intestinal permeability. So, that again is like, I'll do my demonstration.
I love the fingers.
Of the cells together, in your small intestine. And then so it's like they're supposed to be tight, and they kind of move a little bit to let things in they want to let in, but they close back up. But in a leaky gut or intestinal permeability, they open up. And one of the proteins that gets increased in stool and in blood when these start to open is zonulin. So it can tell you that there's increased permeability, and it'll go up and down. But so if it's really high, it means that, it's going up and down always. But once it's really high, it's not going back to normal at that point. At borderline, it may be a little bit, but so that can be associated with increased food reactions. And so, and it may be, and if what we generally see in people is if somebody doesn't have a leaky gut, then food reactions may not be their biggest thing.
Yeah.
So that I might move on from that. I mean, there isn't a study looking at food reactions and zonulin levels in cats and dogs.
Yeah. I think too, one of the other ones that I found really helpful with a lot of my patients is that anti-gliadin A, or sorry, your anti-gliadin, your autoantibody,
Right.
where if we're feeding like a kibble diet that's high in gluten, is that pet actually reacting? Because a lot of times we've talked about this before too in our previous talks, where if we don't necessarily have a symptom, right? Our pet seems fine. They're not itchy. Their stool's normal. It doesn't necessarily mean something's not occurring. And this is like that space where if we can be proactive with some of these new functional medicine tests that are out there, like the Innovative Pet Lab one, where we can test the stool and see, is there actually an immune response? Just like you were talking about with a food sensitivity, or, we're seeing an increase in zonulin, or we're seeing an increase in the inflammation in the gut lining. If we're seeing that our pet is not doing well with gluten and we continue to feed that, so usually your kibble diets, we're going to potentially have a major health issue down the road. And it's going to seem like all of a sudden it appears, right? Where they were fine. And then all of a sudden you're like, what the heck happened? And they're being diagnosed with an autoimmune condition like inflammatory bowel disease or atopic dermatitis, or you're starting to see chronic ear infections because we've led to this adverse immune response in the gut, and it's allowed inflammation. The immune system's overreacted. Now we have inflamed skin because of that gut skin access. And now it can be a lot harder to heal. So I think that's really important, and where testing comes into this talk today, because if we can take a proactive approach versus reacting to symptoms when they appear, because we're going to be a lot further down the line if we see symptoms and we're waiting for symptoms, because believe me, I've been there personally on the human health side. It is not fun, and you don't want to have to climb back up the cliff after you've fallen off of it. So this is where these tests are very helpful in identifying, is this food working for my pet? Now, there's a lot of different factors that can affect the gut, of course, but we're going to be focusing on nutrition today. And so first step, is this food working? Cool. Do a test. Get an idea. You don't necessarily have to do the full comprehensive test. If you can, great, gives you bigger picture, but start there, especially if you are feeding foods that have gluten in it, to see if your pet's already having an adverse reaction to it. I would say for your dogs, especially your cats are obligate carnivores. They do not thrive off of carbs. Their microbiome is not suited for carbohydrate digestion. And so if you are feeding something like a dry food diet, this is the start of a new beginning for you. Sometimes that transition may take the rest of the year. It can sometimes be a hard process, but this is where slowly transitioning your cats and your dogs to a different type of diet can make be a huge benefit for them in the long term. If you're stuck, I dropped an ebook link for a simple guide to optimizing your pet's nutrition with some transition tips. But keep in mind, cats tend to be a little bit slower a lot of times because they're picky and they become kibble addicted. But we definitely want to get our cats away from kibble. And one of the easy tips for me, for my own personal cats, and also too for clients, is if you have a kibble addicted cat, just switch them over to a freeze dried and feed the freeze dried dry, and then start adding moisture as they get used to the new food. So you're kind of you're showing them this is kind of like kibble, but it's a lot better quality. And it's going to be not raw, but it's still kind of the same texture as a kibble because a lot of cats are very texture prone with their food. So definitely give that a try. With your dogs, depending on whether or not they're showing sensitivities, like you change the food, they get loose stool, diarrhea, gassiness. I always say, if you want to go slow, that's fine. It's better to be safe, right, than end up like in the ER with, hemorrhagic or bloody diarrhea. And this is where transitioning over 2 weeks time. So essentially starting with 3/4 of the old food, using 1/4 of the new food, and then doing that for 3 to 5 days. As long as there's no GI symptoms, then go to half and half, no GI symptoms for another 3 to 5 days, 3/4 new food with 1/4 old food, 3 to 5 days, and then 100% the new food. And that can work really, really well. So those are a couple tips to get your pets over to a better quality food. Now, there's something to be said also. This is where I like digestive enzymes, and I find a lot of times it can be very helpful, but not every pet needs digestive enzymes. And Dr. Redmond, I'd love you to talk about for dogs. I know this test is not for cats at this point, but what test do you have that's going to show also kind of like how the pancreas is working and from a more of a functional medicine perspective?
Right. So it's something you would see earlier.
Mhm.
I mean, you saw it later, it would just be, a more significant value. So we look at, we call it the digestion and detox profile. It looks at pancreatic elastase and beta glucuronidase. So pancreatic elastase is an enzyme. So your pancreas and your dog's pancreas and your cat's I mean, that's what pancreases do. They secrete enzymes along with some other stuff. But so pancreatic elastase is an enzyme that breaks down protein. So it's stable. Like there are other enzymes, but they're not as stable. So you don't want to test them just because they get degraded really quickly. So they don't give you an accurate view. So elastase is something that is pretty stable and stays around. So you can look at the level of pancreatic elastase and it gives you a marker of like overall pancreatic function so that and so you want to reach a certain level to know your pancreas is functioning and working well. We don't have it in cats, like you said, and in dogs, usually in most of the research, they're looking at really low levels and dogs are very sick. So there's not a lot of like moderate levels, but that's how it works in people where, you can just be a little bit lower and you might not be, your pancreas might not be functioning as well as it should. So this can let you know, like most dogs we test have great pancreatic function, just like most people. It'll be very high, the pancreas is chugging along. But if it's not, you can add digestive enzymes. So if it's really low and they have a lot of symptoms like diarrhea and weight loss, you need to really address that with your vet. But if it's just a little bit, you may want to try digestive enzymes and see how do they respond to that. Do you see a difference in their stool consistency?
Yeah, and I find that's exactly one of the things where, especially if they're on a harder to digest food or you're looking to transition from like kibble to a fresh diet, whether it's lightly cooked or whether it's raw. If you have a sensitive pet, it's one of the easiest things to add in. And there's a couple different, if you're worried about sensitivities or they seem like they're sensitive to your supplements, this is where you can always use a plant-based enzyme. So you're not worried about like, a beef diet, something beef or pork or something aggravating your pet, and start small. That's the other thing too. I think with a lot of times supplements, we think that our pets don't tolerate the supplements, but they're just sensitive and we have to build up their systems. So, getting a better idea, like, do they truly need this? Once again, rather than guessing, we have these functional medicine tests now to truly identify. But if you're at a place where you're like, I can't access these tests, or, I just want to transition my pets, a little bit of a digestive enzyme to help break down those proteins, fats, and those carbs can really go a long way. And so, it can help with that transition, help avoid some of those GI sensitivities and upset. Now I saw a question too. Judith had a question. Can you do the test if your dog's on a steroid and an antibiotic? Will that affect the test results?
It won't affect how the test is run. Like when we put your sample in and the enzymes interact, having the steroid won't interfere with our ability to get you a number, to get you results. What it's going to show is that like, the calprotectant is going to look better than it would otherwise look. So if your calprotectant comes back, it's moderate or low, then if you went off the steroids, it would probably be higher. And it's doing its job. That's what steroids do. They bring down immune reaction. So you're going to see lower than that. You may not see, the anti-gliadin may not be as strong if they have a reaction there. So generally, like, it's hard to ever get to like baseline. So if you're going to keep doing steroids, if that's part of your dog's day to day, then you can test and see how are things with that day to day. If your dog's going just on for a short time and they're going to cycle off and be off of them, I would just wait until they've gone through the whole cycle and test once you're done with it, because it will falsely make it look better than it would otherwise. So you're not really getting a great picture, but if they're on it long term, you might want to see what's going on.
Yeah. And I think that's a good point. Some of these pets here, we see a lot of really sick pets. And this is where, if this, the meds are working, this is where that holistic approach comes in, because, we don't like steroids, but it's sometimes we need to use them for quality of life to get better control of things. And hopefully over time, what we can do then is we can use herbs. We can get on like the right food therapy plans. We can also use supplements that are going to help like support the adrenal glands that we know are going to be hit a little bit harder with steroids. We can also support digestion. There's a lot of things that we can do if we do have to use steroids to help mitigate the side effects that can come from chronic medications. So I always say, even though I say I'm holistic, I'm not against conventional medications, because there is totally a time and a place that we need these things to kind of calm those fires down. Sometimes we need to do that very quickly. And that's where, these conventional meds can work well, but then we need to be looking at like, okay, why is that flaring up? What is going on? So for feeding a food that is creating a reaction, if the food the way it's processed, like your kibble, your dry food diets are heated at high heat temperatures, they come with chemicals. There's typically more things like glyphosate that are in these. That's going to be impacting the gut health. So this is something where nutrition is a foundation, gut health is a foundation. But if we're missing that, we're not even supporting those detox pathways, we're not supporting the immune system, we're going to get very limited results. And food is not everything, because I'm sure there's some people here where they've shifted their diets, their pet has a health condition, maybe it's allergies, it's usually allergies, and nothing changed. And they keep trying different diet, different novel protein, changing like to a raw diet, and nothing is changing. It is very, very common. And so this is where there's something else going on. And that's where I like the tests. I keep going back to tests because I like knowing what I'm treating. But we also have to take a step back and look at that bigger picture and make sure we're not missing something like environmental toxins. If we're not using detoxification support, those toxins can really get stuck in the body and at a cellular health level impact things like mitochondria. And it just creates a whole host of inflammation. The liver is working harder. If we don't have the right nutrients to support all the phases of detoxification, the gut's not going to do well. And that's where we can also see things like inflammation with a lot of these tests. So just because the gut is inflamed and there's something going on, well, do we have endotoxins from an overgrowth of E. coli or Clostridium? Are we having like lipopolysaccharides being produced that are creating like essentially a toxic load that the body has to deal with and respond with? So there's a lot of factors that play a part. Now, in terms of when we're looking at optimizing your pet's food, so let's say you've transitioned the diet and you're looking at, how do I know this food is the best food? I find a lot of people have great intentions. They want to go to a freshly cooked diet, and we end up feeding like meat and vegetables, like what we would eat for, dinner or lunch, and we're like, okay, well, this is good for me. I can feed my pets this. And this is something which leads a lot of people astray, because we don't see symptoms of a nutritional imbalance until we're months and months down the road. And so I always say to people, make sure you're following like a balanced recipe. If you are going home cooked path, I typically tell people, if this is your first time in this rodeo of making homemade diets, I always recommend like pre-made brands that are good, high quality. If you're not sure which ones, just download the free guide that's listed and linked in I'll link it in the comment section on the webinar chat. But you can also download Susan Thixton's The List for companies that are transparent, high quality, to make sure that you are feeding a good quality food. And then as you start learning and researching on how to balance those diets, then you can start integrating in some of those freshly cooked foods, making your own, balancing raw food diets. So there's a lot of different ways to do it. I just don't want you to go astray. And then all of a sudden we have a zinc deficiency, we have a calcium deficiency, we have a magnesium deficiency, a manganese deficiency, because these can also show up as gut health issues. They can impair the immune system. They can look like a skin allergy when in reality, it's actually a deficiency in some vitamin or mineral. So that's something to be aware of. There's a lot of great resources out there to help guide you though, on making sure you don't go astray. Now, in terms of Dr. Redmond, what would you say are some of the things like you're seeing on those test results that potentially are linking back to the diet for pet parents? That I know this is a very general question, but from all the tests that you've done so far, let's actually shift it to the cats, because cats are super underrepresented a lot of times with talks. What are some of the trends that you're commonly seeing with these cats? And then what we'll do is we'll talk about how that can relate back to probably the type of nutrition they're being fed.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the most interesting things is that when we were getting everything set for cats, we did a little internal analysis and we looked at, the crazy cat lady's cats. And so with somebody who takes really good care of their cats, but then we also we collected, samples from a shelter. And then we compared them, and the shelter cats had so many more issues going on. I was going to say, with nutritional deficiencies, one of the things you see with malnutrition is increased inflammation. It's one of the key signs. So it is hard to tell exactly where it's coming from. So you don't want your diet to be leading to that. But, when we look at the difference between cats who are super well cared for and cats who were getting the very basics, they were at the Humane Society, these shelter cats, and so they're getting fed, they're not being abused, I'm sure they get veterinary care, but just the stress, and then they are only getting kibble and whatever they came in with. So you do see a difference with lifestyle in general and diet in general having an impact on these tests.
Yeah, I remember looking at those tests and that call that we had together. And it was things that, once again, taking a step back, nutrition is so important. And one of the things that we can all optimize for our pets as best as possible. But then if we're living in a really stressful environment, we know that gut-brain axis and emotional health can directly cause leaky gut. And that's been proven over and over again. So if we're, not addressing these types of other factors alongside nutrition, we're going to run into a problem eventually. And it could be also keeping you stuck where you're changing the diet all the time, but it's actually not the diet, where your diet is perfect and it's not creating that inflammation in the gut. So that's definitely, one of those things where too, if you're worried, everything else seems fine, once again, testing if you can. Now, the other thing too, is if you are dealing with a health issue, so an allergy problem, if you're dealing with IBD, a sensitive pet, and you haven't done what we call a novel diet, I highly, highly recommend a novel elimination diet, because if we've been feeding something that is potentially causing inflammation in the gut, the body's overreacted and it's going to continue to react to usually that type of protein because it's become sensitive to it. And this is where a lot of people say chicken is bad. Chicken can be a very good protein when we feed the real chicken, not processed chicken. That's not essentially what we're thinking about when we think about a chicken and what we eat. That's not what's in dry kibble, unfortunately. But when we look at chicken as a fresh food diet, it's in our lightly cooked food. If it's in a raw food diet, chicken is a great protein. It's a great chi tonic from Chinese food therapy principles. It is a little bit warming. But a lot of pets, especially if they've been on processed food diets, may have a sensitivity to that protein. So if this is your pet and you haven't tried this yet, this can be something simple. It's cheap. It's not always easy to do, but you can do this at home where you can feed a new type of protein that your pets never had before. So a lot of times rabbit falls into this category. And thank goodness a lot of companies now have rabbit that you can access. So it's a lot easier to get for your dogs or your cats. You would feed rabbit, you would avoid other proteins. So making sure this is ideally where you can use raw food companies or lightly cooked companies. So Viva Raw is a great one because they have a pure option where you can actually feed that for like 6 to 12 weeks. And then you're watching the supplements you're giving, making sure you're reading the ingredient list. You're looking at if you're giving heartworm preventatives, those are typically beef flavored. That will upset the whole apple cart in a food trial when you're doing that. So you need to be aware of these other factors that could be playing a part. And you do that elimination diet trial. If you're not seeing any results from that, it may not be a food related issue. Once again, it could be a detoxification issue. It could be an environmental health component where you're just surrounded by, like, if we have Glade plugins everywhere, we're using cleaning products, we have like the Tide laundry detergent, like all of these things that seem like they're invisible toxins, right? If you can smell something in the air. So like, for example, every time we walk outside our home, our neighbor, I don't know what they do, but they're constantly running laundry because I can smell their dryer vent. And that's a toxin. And so if you're smelling something in your home, we have to look at, is it a toxin? Is it clean? Where is it coming from? Because all of these things can be stressing our bodies and our pets' bodies and potentially creating inflammation and causing the symptoms that we're seeing. So for 2023, I want everyone here to take a step back. Nutrition is very, very important, but we also need to understand why are things happening and how it's all interconnected. And that's where functional medicine testing is very helpful to identify some of these key puzzle pieces to make your journey easier to identify, are we producing, like, is the pancreas working as well as it should? Are we having an inflamed gut lining? Are we reacting inappropriately to gluten? Do we have the right immune system in the gut? Which leads me into that test, because I love, like, if you can talk a little bit about Dr. Redmond, the IgA and the importance of this and the test that you guys have that can help identify if some of these pets are kind of struggling in that area.
Yeah, so the inflammation and immunity test. Yeah, I was going to say, when you mentioned like detox, I always think of like detoxification things within our body depend on nutrients.
Yes.
Glutathione, which is an intracellular detoxification thing that we have, it's made out of amino acids. So if you're not getting all those amino acids and able to, build it, it's going to be impaired. And so you won't be able to clear those out.
Yeah.
But the inflammation and immunity test, it has calprotection for inflammation and secretory IgA. So IgA stands, Ig is immunoglobulin. And so there's lots of different immunoglobulins, immunoglobulin E or G or M or D. But so we're looking at immunoglobulin A because it's what comes, it's right at the mucous membrane. So it's the first line of defense. So I think that when you think of the gut lumen, here I'm going to go in my graphics. So there's the gut inside the gut lumen, which technically is considered outside the body. So you're going to have a big immune presence there because you want to know, do I want to let it in? So inside you're going to have, like in the gut lumen, you normally would have like, stool, and that's where your microbiome is going to be in there. And then they're also going to be in the gut lining, but then they're going to be mucus. And then there's going to be the gut lining. And so that first line of defense there is going to have secretory IgA to kind of help. I always think of it like, it's like a bouncer. So at the club, can you come in? So it's just kind of seeing what's going on. And so if it's really high, it's responding to something. And the three things we think of first are, parasites, pathogen, and food reactions. So it doesn't like it, it's responding. And though I would rather see, secretory IgA in the normal range, I'd rather see high than low. So low just kind of means I have been responding to this thing for the longest time and I can't do it anymore. Immunoglobulins are, they're proteins too. So if you don't have the right nutrient, or if you have impaired gut lining or leaky gut, that's going to be impaired too. there's a big association with gut bacteria and IgA. So, they need to kind of rise together. So if it's higher, it's better than lower, but if it's higher, you need to figure out what's it upset about, what's going on, what's it reacting to.
Yeah, I find too, this can be coupled with like, hopefully your vet's running like routine blood work, and doing stool tests to look for pathogens, parasites, Giardia, intestinal parasites. Those are all really important. That microbiome test, is there high E. coli, Clostridium? Those are very, very helpful, but also too, your blood work, like on a CBC. So that's your white blood cell count, your red blood cell count. If eosinophils are elevated, that can indicate like a parasite infection. And so because those eosinophils are producing excess histamine, they're reacting to something that shouldn't be there. So these are all little clues and indicators that you can start piecing together through just utilizing like 1, 2, sometimes 3 tests that are going to help identify. Because one of the things that I found with patients also is, I had a German Shepherd, didn't have this test. I didn't know if he had low IgA, but we can also have some genetic predispositions for certain breeds. Right. And so if they're born and they're just kind of like what we call poor doers, right? Where their immune system is struggling a little bit just from the start, it's like, okay, what can we do to support them from a nutrition standpoint? And this is where we can use nutraceuticals, real food, and support them right from the beginning. Because just because you're born with something doesn't mean you have to have all the health conditions, right? And this is where using things like colostrum can be great, be really beneficial for providing some of those immunoglobulins, especially if we have low IgA, can be really helpful, or you're testing and low IgA is there. Medicinal mushrooms can also be used and very, very helpful too. So this is where, even if all you can access are those white button mushrooms, those agaricus mushrooms, getting some of those and lightly cooking them. You have a cat, they love mushrooms because it's a umami flavor. And so using ghee and lightly cooking them in that. Cats love like fats. They love the butter taste. So finely chopping them, you can even like grind them, depending on your cat's texture preference. And just a little bit goes a long way mixed into their food. And we're really supporting that microbiome. It's a prebiotic to feed the beneficial bacteria, but it's also supporting the immunoglobulin. It's supporting that immune system. They're great natural antioxidants. They're a great source of selenium, which helps the thyroid. It helps the local immune system. Like there's just so many things that these like superfoods can help with that we can use as toppers or as a supplement, as an addition to your pet's diet. And this is where I want people to think outside the box. Like it's not just the food going in and like the absorption of the nutrients and the vitamins and minerals, like all these other factors that can play a part to truly optimizing the health and, supporting whatever's going on with them. Dr. Redmond, do you have any other recommendations for like some of the things for supporting those pets when you see?
Yeah, I mean, we always think of Saccharomyces boulardii.
Yep. Yes, that's a great one. Completely forgot about that. That should be in everyone's cabinet. So if you have diarrhea, Saccharomyces boulardii has so many studies on reducing diarrhea, versus metronidazole and completely wrecking, the entire microbiome in the gut. But Saccharomyces boulardii is a great one for the immunity.
Right, and it's a good competitive yeast. So if they have problem with, candida or something, then it kind of, you have a good competition. So it does good things, and then it, fights out other yeast.
Yeah.
I think that all that's so important, like the whole like synergy of everything. So when gut bacteria, they're not just there, they give off compounds, they're fermenting things. And so that's the, if you get gut bacteria assessment, it'll tell you what's there and you kind of know what they can give off, but then how's your body responding to that? Is it, if they're getting the right food or the wrong food, that's going to change what gut bacteria give off as compounds. And so then physiologically, that's really what our tests are looking to see what's happening with that. Are they getting inflamed? Is the immune system overreacting?
Yeah, no, I love that. I think the big key takeaway, I can't believe it's already been 50 minutes, is where, that variety, Can we get as close as possible to a fresh food diet that's balanced long term with variety? Because if we feed the same thing over and over again, we end up with nutritional deficiencies. We're only feeding certain types of bacteria. Those bacteria in the gut are producing, certain postbiotics, and we may be missing a lot of things that the body needs to truly be healthy in the long term. And there's a lot of fear on the pet side around nutrition, and it breaks my heart because it's just, we're not taught it very well in vet school. And so it's something where if you're nervous, if you're worried, like finding a veterinarian that, advocates for fresh feeding and teaches about it, follow them and like start implementing those changes, start making small adjustments. It doesn't always have to be a massive overhaul. And if you're one of those that's like, I'm like this myself. I like seeing what's going on, where things are at, so I can properly measure it and get a better idea of all the puzzle pieces and how they're fitting together. Do some of this testing. Like, I am blown away just in the past 5 years with the amount of different tests that have come out to help us identify where these imbalances are to make your life easier. So if you're getting stuck and you're getting worried, just take a step back and get a test. And these tests you can order yourself. I've been dropping the link, trying to, so that way you have it. But get a test and just see what's the baseline of my pet. I consider these tests as like a proactive preventative test that should be helpful to identify what to tweak and adjust. It should be done ideally every year with your pet's CBC, biochemistry, their wellness blood work profiles, because I find that these can actually a lot of times show up a health problem much sooner than sometimes that blood work. Blood work's really important, but I find like this is going to give us a lot of key indicators that we can adjust for. I'm not sure what that question. Do probiotic strains have the same reaction in animals as in humans? I'm not sure what they mean by that question.
They will have the same impact generally. I mean, if you take if your pet takes probiotics, probiotics are just bacteria that are just kind of moved in while you're taking them. They don't generally take up residence. They're there while you're taking them, but they do all the same things that regular bacteria generally do. So if your pet's taking them, they should help pets. There's a lot of good pet probiotics out there.
Yeah. And there's also a lot of really bad ones too. The devil's advocate on that one.
Yeah.
So this is where a lot of supplements, and I find too, this is also another good reason for testing, because I have so many clients come to me and they're using 30 supplements and their pet is no better. And I'm like, this is complicating things. Let's strip it back. Let's take a step back. Let's think about what is actually causing these symptoms. And then two, let's make sure the brands you're using are good quality brands, because one of the problems that can occur, I'm not a huge fan of purchasing supplements off of things like Amazon. Sometimes there's no other path. So I totally get it. But when we think about how are the supplements being stored, how are they being transported? And when we think about probiotics, especially if they're sitting in an Amazon warehouse that is not temperature controlled, when it heats up to 100 degrees in the summertime, it's essentially mimicking the local environment in the gut. Then it goes into the truck to be shipped to you, and it heats up even more. I don't know if anyone here, have you ever noticed if you get something in the Amazon and you're like, God, it's so hot. Is this okay? It's been cooked. And so it activates those probiotics. So it's things like that to think about. And also to looking at what companies are doing the testing. Are they actually identifying how many, CFUs and things like that are listed on that label? Are there what are the fillers? What are the excipients that could potentially cause, more symptoms potentially? So I think there's supplement industry. There's a lot of great supplements. I advocate for a lot of supplements, but we need to be using them appropriately and also be assessing the brands to make sure we're not creating more harm in the long term. So that's very, very important. And Jane B.
I was going to say there's also fermented foods.
Yes.
I was surprised, when I first learned that, I was like, dogs and cats can fermented foods. Because I think that that's also kind of thing that it's like, oh, don't feed your pet people food. But then once you learn more about it, it's like, well, not if you're eating bad people food.
Yeah,
If you're going to McDonald's, maybe, or
exactly.
just single out anybody. But if you're eating fast food, that's.
Yeah, it's not going to optimize your health, right? And that's too, like kefir is a really good one. Adding a little bit of sauerkraut, goat's milk, fermented goat's milk is a really great option for supporting gut health, for providing additional nutrients, providing good natural probiotics. So those are definitely really good. And it's going to be a little bit more natural and probably a little bit more reliable, right? And so as long as especially if you're using sauerkraut, don't get the sauerkraut from the aisle that's not refrigerated. That has nothing in it, just FYI. That is a waste of your money. It's just like salted cabbage. So, making sure that we're once again buying the things that are unfortunately they're a little bit more expensive. But what's nice about those is you don't need that much, especially for a dog or a cat, which is really good. J&B, never buy it from the middle of the store. It goes with most things in the supermarket,
Yeah,
right?
well, and for people too, you don't need that much.
Yes. Or if you give too much, you'll know, right? So you'll get diarrhea, you'll get gas, your microbiome will react to it. That's why, because we just put a huge dose of those microbes in there. But that's where this functional food really comes in, and being able to support our pet's health. And there's so many good prebiotics or foods that are rich in antioxidants, like blueberries. I love asparagus. Asparagus is one of the highest natural sources of glutathione. And Dr. Redmond, you were talking about, the glutathione and those detox pathways and mitochondrial health, very, very important. And it depletes naturally as our pets age. So using these just as, you don't have to remember all these facts and be like, what did Dr. Katie say? What did Dr. Redmond? Variety. What are the foods that feed you that are optimal? Not the fast food, right? But what are some of these superfoods that we can, cook up, chop up, add as a fresh food topper, to increase the nutrient content, but it's also going to have these additional benefits and bonuses for our dogs and our cats. Awesome. All right. And yes, this is recorded. There will be a replay sent out. This is a great question from Bev Baker, really quick before we finish. What causes low B12? Dog was on Primal Nuggets, Vital Essentials, but was found to have low B12 when testing for some GI distress.
Yeah, I mean, I always think of just absorption and overall inflammation, your ability to absorb it, and your pancreatic function.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a key marker. I
Yeah.
think you can pull certain markers. I know with people, it's like if you can look at B12, you can look at magnesium, vitamin D. If those are bad, probably everything else is going to be bad.
Yes. And there's tests where you can run all of those. VDI is a great company that does blood testing, that you can take those test kits to your vet and check for vitamin D, magnesium, your B12, because like Dr. Redmond said, these are so essential for every system in the body, the immune health. And B12, especially if we're experiencing GI issues, we're experiencing absorption issues, we're experiencing, intrinsic factor, that large intestine is a big part of that B12 and that absorption. And if we have an issue that's going on in the gut, a lot of times we're going to be deficient, and we need to make sure that we know that, so that way we can supplement, since it's once again an important part of methylation and binding those toxins and processing them and getting them out of the body. So once again, functional medicine testing, and there's a lot of different options out there now, and a lot of options that aren't that expensive. So rather than blowing $100 on supplements you probably or may not even need, right? Get an idea and actually know what you're treating, so that it'll work a lot better. You'll feel more confident too, in what you're doing. And then also too, continue to follow Innovative Pet Lab and all the amazing stuff, the research that they're putting out there, the lives that they do with other practitioners, ourselves, just continue to learn and start implementing and small little tweaks and small adjustments to that diet, and you'll become more confident as you do that, because when we start small, that 1% change, I always say like those small changes, one thing every day, right, adds up. Think about if you just change like by 1% every day. Okay, I can get better 1% each day. Imagine where you're at in a year's time. You're 365% better. That's a
Right. And I
huge
think
change.
you don't have to know every single thing. Like you don't have
No.
to know magnesium is important for 300 plus enzymes in the
Yeah.
body. And I think when you see B12 low, you like, why? Just
Yeah.
like if somebody saw iron low, like why in a person? It's like you got to try to, is it inflammation? Is it just their diet? Kind of track that down. But
Yeah.
it feel like a lot, especially when there's been so much like, don't let pets have that. They can't, you have to give them this packaged food. And the first time I gave Linda blueberries, I'm like, oh, she likes blueberries.
I know. Well, it's like giving my cats, a raw diet the first time. And I was like, am I going to kill them? Like, and they loved it and they did fine. Like, it's one of those things where, I think that's a great point about asking why. So if you're like, I don't know how to figure out the answer to the why, ask your vet, why is this happening? Rather than just getting a supplement or a medication, why are we using this? What does it mean in the body? And if your vet can't answer that, ask them, where can we find those answers? Because there's always a reason something is going on. There's not just a symptom and it's just hanging out, doing its thing, like the body decided to try to kill itself one day. There's always a reason why something happened. And we just have to continue to ask why and work down that path to figure it out. But once again, optimizing that food, just small changes, small steps. If you need help and guidance, download the free guide. There's some recipes that are balanced in there for a lightly cooked or raw food diet for both dogs and cats. And I'll, of course, share those links to you so you have some of that to get started on that path. Even if this is day one, welcome. It's a beautiful journey and it's definitely a journey, but continue to learn. We'll definitely, have Dr. Redmond back. Make sure you check out our other webinars we've done too at our YouTube channel, Dr. Katie Woodley, the Natural Pet Doctor. And if you're needing additional help and guidance, reach out. We have some online group programs that support you, guide you, help you with these questions. So that way you make sure that you're on the right path to truly healing your pets. And Dr. Betsy Redmond, thank you so much for
Oh,
being here.
thanks. It was fun.
I would love for you to share where they can learn more about Innovative Pet Labs.
Yeah, I mean, you can go to our website, Innovative Pet Labs. And so we just review the tests that we do, and they'll have like, here's our comprehensive. But so we have, comprehensive is all of them. So there are 3 pairs of tests. So there's inflammation, there's digestion, there's leaky gut. And there'll be a little symbol by each one if they do cats and dogs. So the only one, so for cats, we do inflammation and immunity and leaky gut. But right now we're not doing the digestion for cats, but it's still, you can get a lot of information. And if you start out and everything's great and you think you're doing everything great and the tests are great, then probably things are going great. So
Yeah.
you can kind of like check, I can keep doing what I'm doing.
Yeah. Because I think the peace of mind is so important because who here's ever doubted themselves? Right? It's like you with Linda and blueberries, right? Like
Every day, but then I thought,
I
wait,
know.
is it as much as every hour? I mean,
Yeah, every minute I doubt know it. So I mean, but we're all like that, whether or not we're a vet, whether or not we're, just trying to figure this out on our own and get started on a different path. Like that is normal. And so I think, it's always nice to know that what we're doing is making a difference for our pets. And if it can give you some peace of mind to help you on this journey, 100% take advantage of it. And once again, I'll share that code. There's a discount code Natural Pet 25 for 25% off. So 100% use that, take advantage of all the knowledge that Dr. Redmond has, and just make sure you're on the right path to helping your pets this year. And just quickly, which test fits well for cats with GI lymphoma? I would do the 2 cat tests, see what's going on, see how inflamed it is, and that will help guide you where some of those imbalances that might have led to something like a cancer, where you can start healing it and supporting the quality of life. I'm not saying we're necessarily going to heal cancer, don't get me wrong, but there is a lot of progress we can make when we know there's these deficiencies, because we can optimize the way the body works, where the way the gut health, the microbiome, the immune system. And it can make it so much easier, especially if you're coupling it with like chemotherapy or stronger medications. You're less likely to have those side effects that can come with it when we've optimized those other areas of the body. So these tests work for anything, whether it's preventative or whether we're looking at certain diseases, just to showcase where those gaps are so we know how to treat it.
And it can track treatment. So as you get better,
Exactly.
the tests get better. So you know you're doing the right things.
Exactly. Especially when you have cancer. I've been there. I've had 2 cats with GI lymphoma and we didn't have these tests. And I just had to kind of like assume that we were on the right path. So this, especially when you're going through something like that, that's very stressful, you don't know if what you're doing is right. These tests are so helpful at making sure you're on the right path, or you can adjust what you're doing without having to guess, which is really, really empowering for people. All right. Well, Dr. Redmond, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you. I always enjoy our time together, whether it's in person or it's on our lives. And once again, I really appreciate you kind of taking a step out from the like human functional realm and creating Innovative Pet Lab and filling that space that was so needed for our dogs and cats and functional medicine testing. So for everyone here, if you haven't checked out their website, go to innovativepetlab.com, check out some of that testing. And I highly recommend doing one of them just to get started and see where your pets are, beginning of the year. We're not through January yet. We've got the entire year ahead of us to help your pets just be their best and healthiest yet for all of 2023 and beyond. So thanks again so much. I'm Dr. Katie Woodley, the Natural Pet Doctor, and we'll see you all soon. All right, take care, everyone. Bye.